Welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Corinne Walmsley, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
Hello everyone, and my name is Corinne. I am an occupational therapist and I am so excited to be here today on the Research Works podcast.
I love that you're here. Dr. Corinne Walmsley is an occupational therapist, as she just said, and she is here because Ash has actually just had her baby, as all of you guys might have heard through the podcast leading into it. She has had a beautiful baby girl named Macy, and we have thought, well, we'll just give her a few weeks off just to, get used to a family of four. But I know she's listening, and as you can tell, when we've got a new guest on here, it probably means something a little bit special as well, because as an occupational therapist, there's a lot of things to talk about. And our guest today is Dr. Belinda McLean, who's also an occupational therapist. You can tell that there's a bit of a takeover. Welcome, Belinda.
Hi, Dana, Corinne. Thank you so much for having me.
Really, really lovely to have you on the show today. So as per usual, I'm going to now take over the duties that Ash normally has as an icebreaker to, get to know us a little bit more. And I think there are some vital things you can know about someone based on some of these questions that we ask, actually. And my question today is, are you ready? Who is your favorite superhero and why? Corinne, I'll go to you
first up. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to have to say Wonder Woman. I think Wonder Woman is brave, independent, and really strong, and I love those qualities.
Oh, very nice. I like that as well. Well done. I'll remember that for next time.
I love Wonder Woman. Favorite movie, just for the goosebumps that come in that scene where she steps up out of the trenches. But my favorite superhero from when I was a very small child is Superman. And the reason why Superman is my favorite is because I watched him grow. I watched him as I grew up as a small child on my VCR, and he was my dad, because Dad and Mum had gone to one of those live theatre restaurants and they'd put on a little play where Dad got to play the role of Superman, and they filmed it. And so as a little kid, I got to grow up watching my dad become Superman and save the day and putting
that's great.
Black circle ring on a bad guy's eye, and it was amazing. It fell off. It was a fantastic production. So Superman gets first place for me.
Very, very cool.
Wow, that is such a cool one. I love the story with it.
It is. So Dana, what about yours?
Mine changes on a daily basis, but at the moment, for me, it's The Flash. Yep. And I often get people say, don't let, life pass you by, do things too quickly. But in the recent movie of Justice League, I would like to say it defies all of that, because The Flash actually moves so fast that you can see everything happening around you in slow motion. So you haven't missed any of it. You get to see it. You see the beauty of everything, even whilst you're moving really, really fast. So The Flash, for me, is the reason why I love that as a superhero. So there you go. You want to know a little bit more about us. Well, I'm sure you all wanted to know that about us, but let's get into why we're actually here. We're so excited to talk about something very occupational therapy, but as a physiotherapist myself, I can see how this relates to every other area. Today, we'll be reviewing an article that was recently published just in 2021 in the Australian Occupational Journal. The article is titled Somatosensory Discrimination Impairment in Children with Hemiplegic Cerebral Palsy as Measured by the Sense Assess Kids.
So today our guest is lead author Dr. Belinda McLean, who represents her co-authors Dr. Susan Taylor, Clinical Professor Jane Valentine, Dr. Leanne Carey, Dr. Ashley Thornton, and Professor Catherine Elliott. Belinda is an occupational therapist, and her work in the area of sensation in children with cerebral palsy represents a large body of work that was her PhD, completed through the University of Western Australia. Belinda has been very busy since the completion of her PhD and currently holds a postdoctoral research position at Curtin University. She is also based at Perth Children's Hospital, and her work continues on from the important body of work and findings from her PhD. She is also a mother of 3 under 4, and yes, we know what that means, twins. As you can imagine, life is full, and the fact that we have her on the podcast today means that there was a lot of preparation just to be here. So we are so grateful that you are here, Belinda. So welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, well, Belinda, this is such an important piece of work. And as we mentioned before, this is not just for occupational therapists, it's for everyone involved in the provision of any treatments for individuals with cerebral palsy. So we talk so much about cerebral palsy being a motor disorder. And, as you've heard from all the podcasts so far, that's just one part of it. There's so many factors that influence function and sensation. We've all kind of intuitively known this, but the fact that you've quantified it to talk about it means that it's really, really important. We need to talk about it more and how it affects what it is that we do.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think this is really exciting work, Belinda. And being an occupational therapist myself, bringing somatosensation to everyone's attention is really important. Having the knowledge as well as standardised assessments that we can have in our toolbox that we can use in the future is extremely useful and hopefully will enhance our clinical care in the future. So I'm excited to hear more about it. Dana, should we get into the specifics of the study?
Let's do it. Can't wait. So let's go through the actual abstract itself and the main features. So in this study, there were 28 children with hemiplegic or unilateral spastic cerebral palsy, aged between 6 and 15 and a half years, a mean age of 10.1 years. And they all had a manual ability classification system or a max of 1 or 2. All children participated in the Sense Kids, which is a standardised norm reference assessment of functional somatosensory capacity of the upper limb in children. And encompassed within this assessment includes measures of tactile registration, tactile discrimination, limb position sense, and haptic object recognition. In addition to this, children were also assessed on the box and blocks test. So here are the results. All right, here's some stats. So 82% of children presented with impairment in somatosensory discrimination. 74% had impaired wrist position sense. 75% demonstrated impaired haptic object recognition. 67% demonstrated impaired tactile discrimination. And 21% showed impairment in registration of protective touch. Now, more than 2/3, that being 71%, had impairment in 2 or more domains. And the higher the number of impaired somatosensory domains was associated with poorer unimanual motor performance. And in light of these results, the paper concludes by recommending somatosensory function assessment for children with hemiplegic cerebral palsy, and that somatosensory impairments have implications for both assessment and treatment of the upper limb.
So I guess that's a bit of a summary of the work, and we can really see here that the results are really quite profound, Belinda. We have had indications that somatosensation was impaired in children with cerebral palsy previously, but I think these results really help us to put that into perspective. From the paper, we can see that somatosensation is really a quite complex entity and is made up of multiple components. So I thought before we kind of dive into it a little bit more that maybe you could explain to us what somatosensation is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have a favourite definition. It's a wonderful working definition that I use, and it was by Winnie Dunn in 2013. Mm-hmm. Her definition is that somatosensation refers to all aspects of touch and proprioception that contributes to a person's awareness of their body parts and the direct interface of these with objects and the environment. So it's really functional, where sensation meets our doing, our functional capacity. And it is super important. I feel like our time is now. We've known for a long time that sensation for these kids has frequently been impaired because I didn't, but there was a lot of work being done in the space in the 90s, but we didn't really get far. We didn't have a good repeatability of measures, and I guess we didn't have really effective interventions. And the timing of this is around us looking at what we can do about it as well, which is outside the scope of this paper, but I'm excited for this conversation to continue. But protective touch is a measure of touch registration, which is where one single point touching your skin, your brain can recognise that your body is receiving a touch. We measured at the level of protective touch with the thought that a person who has impaired registration at the level of protective touch would have reduced sensation across domains. And in fact, that's what we saw. All of the kids who had impaired tactile touch perception in the protective touch test also had reduced sensation across all of the others. And those others, texture discrimination is what it sounds like.
As it seems,
The test is the tactile discrimination test, but it's looking at texture discrimination and how well we can differentiate between different textures when we're exposed to them. And limb position sense is exactly that. Are we aware of where our body is positioned in space when we're not visually attending to it?
Yeah.
And haptic object recognition is a little bit of a higher level function where we're taking in lots of those other aspects of sensation and we're forming an image of what that is in our minds. We're getting information about the position of objects in our hands. Are we holding them correctly? What are they? Is that I've got the 50-cent piece out of my pocket or my wallet when I wanted it? And
Sure.
do I know that's my keys in my hands when I've tried to get it out of my bag?
Can I ask you about that one? That was one, that's terminology I haven't really heard before. Is it the same as stereognosis? That's kind of the term I sort of relate to it, or is it different?
So that's a really excellent question for Dr. Susie Taylor, who developed these tools in partnership with Professor Leanne Carey out at La Trobe Uni. She knows the finer points between that. I believe that we have historically used stereognosis for the same thing.
Sure.
We're moving more towards haptic object recognition because it involves the description of the fact that it does involve some shaping of the hand in the process of getting that information. So for some of our kids, they need assistance to explore objects.
Yeah. And that's where you kind of help them to explore that object to be able to
absolutely
get those properties.
And we've seen kids who need to be assisted to explore an object still have excellent object recognition. And we've seen other kids who can self-explore objects have poor object recognition. So that is to say that we can't assume when we see a child moving their hand, we do need to understand what's going on for them that we can't see.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess somatosensation really is like a broader term that then underneath you have tactile registration, limb position sense, discrimination and haptic object recognition. Is that right?
Yeah, they're certainly the components of somatosensation that we're very interested in.
Yeah, perfect.
So it's great to look at all the components that make up somatosensation. And I think when you can understand that, then it makes sense then when you want to look at assessment, what are you actually looking at? Now, before we talk about the actual assessment, I do know in this paper it does reference yourself, Dr. Corinne Walmsley, about some work you did. So can you talk a little bit about what you did there? And I guess that was a lead into a lot of what happened here.
Yeah, definitely. So that was kind of the lead into Belinda and Susan Taylor's work. So as an honours student, I did a questionnaire and we kind of cast it to clinicians around Australia, really just asking them about the importance of somatosensation in their practice and the type of assessments that they use. And really the results of that kind of said, yes, it is important, but we really don't know how to assess it reliably and in a valid way. So that kind of paved the pathway for sense assess as well and the intervention to follow.
Oh, that makes so much sense now. So really then, sense now. So what I really love about it is that it is something that you can do at home, which I think is a fabulous
very
thing,
exciting,
right? And it can take up to 40 minutes to complete. So Belle, can you go into what the assessment actually looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. It comes in a kit from the Florey Institute of Neuroscience, and it contains everything we've discussed, the protective touch test and the tactile discrimination test, functional tactile object recognition test items, and the wrist position sense test. And these are all things, excitingly, that you can retest. The protective touch test they're all vision occluded. There's a lovely frame for the intervention where there's a base with a comfortable foam for things that we just have the hand directly on it and a curtain that separates you from the child so they can't see. Kids really struggle with not being able to see, and we've got a few recommendations in the pediatric implementation of this of how to help manage kids through that process. But the protective touch test is 4 touches of the filament on the front and then again on the back of each hand. And kids are not told when to expect it. They're just asked to respond when they feel a touch.
Right.
The tactile discrimination test is a series of forced choice texture sets where there's 3 textures and 2 are the same and 1 is different, and kids are asked to tell us which 2 are the same. And that's, of course, out of vision. The functional tactile object recognition test has a poster of very common and well-known items as well as items that are a little bit more less familiar for children. Okay. So there's a mixture of demand. And then we present objects to their hand out of vision and they respond which one they think it is on the poster next to them. Right. And we've got some reference items for size at the top of the poster because they're ranked from large to small. Okay. So we give them an idea of what to expect. Yeah. Those representations will be in real life. And then the wrist position sense test has got to be my favourite. There's a lower platform with a forearm support and a hand support on a pointer that's out of vision with an upper level that has another protractor and a pointer. So the child's hand goes underneath and we can position them in different – they're pseudo-random, so we know which ones we'll move them to for left or right hand, and we move them through a series of 20 positions within an arc of typically functional movement. And they can't see our eyes or our shoulders. We just move them in rapid succession from one position to another, and they let us know where they think their hand is. And that's a really nice one because a lot of other measures of limb position have been just movement and matching movement with the other side, and it's really hard to retest the change in that, whereas this gives you a degree of error score that we can compare between time points.
Yeah. Sounds like a really practical kind of test that makes sense as well for what it is that you're actually trying to assess. So you mentioned that you can get access to this through the Institute. What training is required?
Yeah, so the equipment comes with a full instruction manual. Right. But there's also a 2-day workshop available that Professor Leanne Carey runs. Okay. And that's all organised through the Florey Institute. I'm not yet at the stage where I've got a course that I'm running regularly, but I welcome people getting in touch with me if they're interested in training because we can definitely help people upskill in the area of this assessment with a paediatric group. Yeah. So
to be clear though, you can't do this assessment unless you've had this training, or is the instruction manual enough for clinicians who are already in the community? Can they take it?
I think that clinicians who are already in the community can get the instruction manual and follow this standardised measure. Right. But it also comes with an intervention kit, and I do recommend getting some training in that.
Fabulous. Okay. No, that's really, really good to know.
Yeah, it's really, really good that it's kind of accessible to therapists and they're able, to get their hands on it, which, often it can be assessments that you can't use but you know about. Yeah. So that's really great. So in the paper you mentioned the box and blocks test, which takes approximately 5 minutes. For those that don't know, can you briefly just describe that, Belinda?
Yeah, so the box and blocks test is very much how it sounds. There's about 100 blocks in the box, and the box is a wooden box that's opened up and has a divider in the centre, and children pick up one block at a time and move it across the divider to the other side as quickly as they can in 1 minute. And we look at both hands, and there's a little 10-second practice with each hand before they do the actual test trial.
Yeah, great. And so that's more looking at, your manual dexterity using your hands?
Yeah, definitely gross manual dexterity. Yeah. But it's a nice quick one to pull out to.
I know my son's a little bit fun as well.
Yeah, it is. Kids love a contest.
Yeah. Okay, so we've gone through the assessments now, which is a really great context. So thank you for explaining that, and having both of you guys here helps me as well because I'm not so familiar with a lot of these assessments. So let's go into some of the results, hey, because they were really exciting. So the one I really want to talk about is the 21% of children that showed impairment in registering protective touch. So in this paper, you described that similar to previous studies, children with impaired protective touch also had impairments across all measures of somatosensory domains and therefore should be prioritised for intervention. So talk us a little bit about that. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, so there's a reason. So my recommendation that those children be prioritised for intervention is different to another study's recommendation. But the reason I made that suggestion is because I had already done a pilot study, and the kids that we saw who had impaired protective touch developed functional use of their hand. Wow. And it wasn't finessed and perfect, but they were able to do more things than they could before. And I really feel like if we can give those kids a functional assisting hand, then that's worth our investment in terms of treatment.
Yeah, that's so important. And when you say that, it reminds me of part of the work that I did for my PhD is using functional electrical stimulation. And we use that as part of a walking device. So it was like a walk aid for foot drop. And we did do the protective sensation for the legs and actually tried to find out what children could feel. And in the children who only had protective sensation or even the absence of that, which is kind of explains why they can get blisters and sores from wearing the AFOs because they can't feel it.
Yeah.
After they use the FES device, the ones who were, they come up as red, don't they, on the Siemens-Weinstein monofilaments.
Yeah.
They actually all improved and they were able to feel more. And so that was only a really small group. So we haven't really published that yet, but that was only in 5 children. And I kind of go, well, there's a modifiable feature here. I don't think we can just label it and say this is what they've got. And you do talk about this modifiable potential.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so I did another study, the pilot study that I just referred to, having that young person in, where we saw that we improved wrist position sense and kids achieved their goals and they improved their bimanual hand use. And it's just so important. And we get a lot of incidental stuff as a researcher from families who share things that you can't capture because it's just such a small amount.
Yep.
But when you hear things are making a difference because everything else a family's tried, it really helps you double down in your own investment in the work. So it's so that paper has been out for a little while since 2017. But we did see that we could modify sensory function and improve bimanual hand use, and all the kids achieve their goals.
And that's really exciting, Belle. Really exciting work. Yeah. You did mention, the correlation between somatosensory impairment and motor performance as determined by the blocks and blocks. So I guess children that had more somatosensory impairment had a lower score on that test?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And so the more somatosensory domains impaired influenced the quality of motor performance?
Yeah, absolutely. So and I think the reason is really intuitive. If you've got poorer quality sensory information coming in, then it's harder for you to adjust your grasp and get a good grip on the block to move it across, and then to maintain your grip as you move it across a divider and to the other side. Yeah. So I think that link's really intuitive, and it wasn't surprising at all for us to see.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things here that I think what I like in research studies like this is what we have seen as clinicians is now being backed up by good scientific data. And we talk about being evidence-based. And evidence-based, as you heard from Professor Andrew Whitehouse a few weeks ago, it's this combination of 3 factors. It's great clinical experience, is the actual scientific evidence, and listening to what families want. And hearing you guys already talk about this is really already evidence-based therapy. We're talking about the goals that children and their families have. We're talking about what we've seen, and what we've seen intuitively is changing, and now the science behind it. So I think that's just such an important area for us to go, you know what, we're on the right track, but we need to do more. So if we go back into the elements of somatosensory and how that impacts motor performance, can we explore that a little bit more and just really unpack that? What are some of the features, I guess, that we should be thinking about when we're devising an intervention, when we consider all of these factors?
So if I can step out and talk a little bit about the intervention that I'm investigating.
Yeah, great.
It focuses largely at its core on principles of learning-dependent neuroplasticity, which won't shock you.
Funny that.
Right? We know that it's helpful. Yep. So the features of, and I can really mainly speak to my intervention, although there is a really nice little framework to think about sensory interventions that I'll touch on in a second.
Sure.
But the sense intervention looks at introducing an object to a child when they can't see what it is that they're exploring. So they've got to actively explore it with their full attention engaged.
Yep.
And then we'll ask them, we'll actually show them 2 items out of vision and ask them to tell us if they were the same or different. Mm-hmm. And if they are correct in their answer, then we just give them a look and feel to show them that you're absolutely right and confirm what they knew.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if they get it wrong, then we dig into the work of it. And that's really where we want to be, is just at the right challenge.
Yes.
And so we'll we'll invite kids to feel it with their less impaired hand and have a really good look, and we'll ask them to use imagination to match how the item feels in between their hands in a really structured way. And then we'll repeat and progress. So then they'll get to practice it, but they practice it using purposeful anticipation. So they'll know there's no tricks. I'm only going to show you this item or this item.
Right. Yeah.
I could show you two that are the same or two that are different, but these are the only things that I'm going to show you, so that they can really increase their attention to the very obvious parts of the sensory information that we're exploring, because we focus our attention on specific things like shape or weight or crushability. And then they can progress to harder stages as they start to more confidently get it right. So that won't surprise you at all, but it's a really cool way of applying those principles to something that we can't see.
Yeah.
But some work has been done by Megan Ould looking at interventions. If you don't mind, I'll just have a quick talk through that, because it did kind of look at it's called the apartment block theory. Don't know if you've heard of it, but she looked at the effectiveness of interventions for sensation and kind of what they looked like. So the first one was repeated exposure. She described it as ringing on the doorbell of the apartment block to try to reach someone who's right at the top that you want to visit. And repeated exposure to sensory stimuli hasn't shown to be effective in helping improve sensory function.
Right, okay.
Then there's, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's piggybacking or including sensory exposure in motor task, where your attention is on the motor task.
Yes.
Such as with constraint-induced with constraint therapy or with bimanual therapy.
Yeah.
But, and that's kind of, it's not called sneaking in the door, is it? But it's, she found that sensation might immediately improve in some cases, but the gains aren't retained. Okay. But where attention is placed on sensory features in a task using visual attention, then she's observed that there's some gains in the literature. And for us looking at sense, we use vision, and we purposefully use vision occluded so that we can enhance children's attention and really engage their neural pathways as we challenge them to be able to really start to focus in on the information they're getting. And we're seeing that that's really helpful. But I like that framework for clinicians to look at to help guide their decision making in practice.
It's really great that we know that there's these principles that are causing improvements in motor performance. And now we're sort of going, okay, it's kind of the same thing, but you need to be as task specific now based on your goal. Yeah. I mean, Corin, you do a lot of this work clinically. You know, what are some of the things that you think you could take away to put into your practice?
Yeah, well, I guess, the task specific is really great. You're wanting kids to really hone in on the task that is their goal, and practicing that in a repetitive way. But I really think we can incorporate, the sensory side of things a lot more in our practice as being OTs. Sometimes it can get, left on the side as motor impairment is predominant. That's what you see. But, as we know here, there's somatosensation really does impact motor performance. And if we're targeting that right from the early intervention, then, we can hopefully enhance, the care for these kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been really specific. I mean, that's what I'm hearing here. Like, a lot of our interventions, there'll probably be some improvements if we were to assess them. We'd probably find it. But if we're more specific about it and going, actually, we want to improve sensation and these aspects of sensation for these motor tasks and functions based on their goals.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been task specific, isn't it? It's a great thing that we can take away.
Absolutely. And we know well that not all therapies work for all children. So it might be a really nice option for those kids that aren't responding to typical approaches.
Yeah, that's such a great way of looking at it. And, previously we've been talking about, who's responding to therapies and treatments, and a lot of them being very motor-based interventions, and they go, well, some are responding really well and some less so. I wonder, even the ones who are responding less so, are they part of that 71% that you talked about that had more than 2 domains of impairments and sensation? Like, we don't know that because we hadn't assessed it.
Exactly, yeah.
So it would be wonderful to explore that in the future.
Yeah. So, Belle, is there any other recommendations for your future work? Where to from here?
Oh, my goodness. It's super broad at the moment. There's a lot going on in the background. But first things first, we're completing a randomised control trial to get better quality evidence out there about the follow-on from our pilot study.
Yeah,
so
great.
we're in the active phase recruiting 50 kids with hemiplegic cerebral palsy here in Perth. Sorry, if you know someone, send them my way. We're very excited and hoping to complete by the end of this year. We've got a fantastic team of therapists I'm working with. And once that's completed, I really want to see this move to younger kids.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's exciting, and I definitely want to be a part of the driving force behind that. I've got 3 little kids. I've done loads of homework with them. But I think about the fact that 4 in 5 kids with hemiplegia, so that's before we even to broaden out our inclusion group, have some impairment in somatosensory function. Assessing very young children in this way is just impossible. But I'm starting to think that even though we can't assess what we can't see at the moment, we know that it's that prevalent that 4 in 5 kids will have some impairment.
Wow.
And I think it's on us to work hard to have a multifaceted intervention approach for those early days, because somatosensation develops along in our perceptual learning alongside communication and motor performance. So a really developmentally appropriate, multifaceted intervention that includes some very strong sensory focus, I think, because that's my jam, is definitely where we're headed, I think.
Oh, that is such a great call to all clinicians and researchers to focus on this area. I think if we're wanting to improve outcomes, well, this is another area that we do need to think about, not just in assessment, but in treatment. So, Belle, that was wonderful. Now we are leading to the next segment, which has been very popular, actually. Getting lots of good feedback about this one. I don't know how I feel about that one for Ed, but here we are for the 60-second pitch to the common man, Ed. Now, Ed is our producer. We can't do the show without him. He's learning so much about this area. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he will soon get his honorary doctorate, I am sure.
Nice.
Welcome to the show, Ed.
Thanks for having me.
The only time we turn the mic on for him. Okay, now, Belle, you have got 60 seconds or so. I'm not going to time you or kick you off, don't worry. But just to really be able to describe what you've done. And this is a great way for clinicians to think about how they can describe this to families that they're working with.
So nervous, Ed. You're such a star. I took notes. Okay, so we did a study looking at impairment in body sensations of the hands in children with hemiplegic cerebral palsy. The body sensations we were most interested in are those that help us discriminate between textures, object properties, and that help us know where our body is positioned in relation to its other parts, so that we can play sport and keep our eyes on our opponent and not our hands, or fish something out of our bag without looking and adjust our grasp on a slippery glass. Before we did this study, we knew we would see high levels of impairment in body sensations that are important for function, and this is because we had some older studies that had looked in this area before. But even with this knowledge out there, though, we aren't assessing sensory functions for these children in our practice. So part of this work was focused on raising awareness of this gap in our practice and taking an initial look at how they might be impacting on children's functions at a time when we were also looking at interventions to try to help alleviate some of these effects.
Oh, that was good. That was very good. All
You have
right.
to prep for Ed.
Well, Ed, do you have any questions?
I think I say this every episode, but I have lots and lots of questions.
You do say that every episode.
And yes, only time for one. But I guess this one's a little personal for me because years and years ago, I went through some chemotherapy and actually lost sensation in my hands and my feet. And so, like from firsthand experience, I kind of knew what it was like I like to play guitar and to look at my hands and be able to play a guitar chord, but not actually feel my fingers on the actual guitar. Now, sensation eventually returned for me, but it's such an important aspect, and I guess I'm really surprised that it's not something that's taken into account in normal therapy services. or I guess that's my understanding of it. And like how important is it to make a dedicated focus in this area? I knew from firsthand experience it was bizarre, and like I was glad that my sensation came back, but to live a life where that was a condition that I would have to live with would seem like I would take a lot of time to try to recover some sort of functionality in that area. So I guess I'm surprised that there's not more work being done in this area.
Yeah, and I was too. Thank you so much for sharing. It's really important, and there is some work that we're looking at doing in peripheral injuries as well, but I put that on the shelf. But there's really not a lot of work in sensation in pediatrics in more broader terms, so that would even more shock you. The kids that we see with cerebral palsy, it hasn't even occurred to them and their families that they might have had reduced sensation, because for their entire time that they've enrolled in services, they've been looking at how they move, because that's what we can see. Very excitingly for me, especially coming back from maternity leave, and you know what research can be like. You've got it's a lot of work, and I think it's very important. So you can get yourself a little bit worked up about it and needing to do it all right now. But Bernard Dan published an editorial in the Developmental Medicine and Child Neurology journals. It's calling to action the whole sector and saying that we now need to consider that cerebral palsy is a sensory motor condition and treat children accordingly. So I feel like our time is now, and we are actually going to see big changes. Thank goodness, Ed, for you and me to sleep well at night.
Nice.
That was actually a really great way to talk about it and finish that, Belle. Thank you so much for that. And Ed, thank you for sharing your story and what it means. I think it's wonderful to hear that voice. Yeah. So, as usual for everyone, the run sheet notes are available on our website, so researchworks.net. We'll even put Belle's email address there, so if you are interested in being involved in the studies or want to know more about it, she's the person to contact for that. Now, if you want this recorded as part of your CPD requirements, remember you can always fill out a form on our website, and that will give you some reflection notes as well, so it can really count towards your CPD hours, and we'll give you that record for it.
So next week we have Dr. Sarah Reedman on the podcast to talk about her paper that was also just recently published in Developmental Medicine and Child Neurology. It's titled Participation Predictors for Leisure Time Physical Activity Intervention in Children with Cerebral Palsy. We are so excited to talk about this paper with Dr. Reedman, and she is such a wonderful presenter, so it's really leading the way in physical activity and participation. So we really hope you can join us next week.
Yeah, definitely join us. Thank you so much, Belle, for being on the show.
Thank you, Belinda.
We've loved it.
Thanks so much. I've had fun.
Thank you. See you guys next week. Bye.